Mark always said the lake cabin was not just a house, it was a memory made of wood and stone. His grandfather had built it with his own hands many years ago, choosing the quiet spot by the water where tall pines whispered and the lake shined like a silver mirror in the morning light. Every summer, Mark and his family went there. They fished on the wooden dock, cooked together in the small kitchen, and sat by the fire in the evenings. For them, the cabin was not a luxury. It was a place where love lived. On one warm Saturday morning, Mark drove up with his wife, Anna, and their 2 children. The children cheered when they saw the cabin roof appear through the trees. Mark smiled, remembering how he had once done the same as a boy when his parents brought him here. But this time, something unusual caught his eye. A bright orange paper was stuck to the cabin's front door. His heart sank a little. "Dad, what is that?" his daughter asked. Mark pulled the paper down. It was a notice from the Homeowners Association, the HOA. It said his family owed unpaid fees. It also mentioned fines and warnings. "That's strange," Mark muttered. "We always pay on time." Anna looked worried. "Maybe it's a mistake." Mark folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He didn't want the children to feel concerned. "Don't worry. I'll handle it," he said, smiling gently. Inside, the cabin was the same as always. The air smelled of pine wood. The small curtains his mother had sewn years ago still hung in the windows. On the mantel sat old family photos, his grandfather with a fishing rod, his parents smiling in front of the lake, and Mark himself as a boy, holding his first catch. That night, while the children slept, Mark sat by the fireplace reading the notice again. His father, Peter, who had come with them for the weekend, walked in slowly with a mug of tea. "What's on your mind, son?" Peter asked. Mark handed him the paper. "HOA says we didn't pay fees. But I know I sent them. I even kept receipts." Peter frowned. His face, wrinkled with age, still showed strength. "Then it must be an error. But be careful. Sometimes mistakes are not accidents." Mark nodded. He trusted his father's wisdom. The next week, back in the city, Mark called the HOA office. A woman answered with a firm voice. "Yes, Mr. Mark, your account shows several missed payments," she said. "That can't be right," Mark replied calmly. "I have proof. I'll send copies of my bank records." He emailed everything, thinking it would be solved quickly. But days later, another letter arrived. This time, it was more serious. It said if the balance wasn't cleared, legal action could begin. Anna grew more anxious. "Why are they not checking your proof? Why are they ignoring it?" Mark tried to stay calm. "I don't know. But I'll keep pushing." One evening, the family gathered at Peter's home for dinner. The whole family was there, Mark's brother David, his sister Maria, and their parents. They all loved the cabin as much as Mark did. He laid the letters on the table. Everyone leaned closer to read. "This makes no sense," Maria said softly. "We've always paid." David shook his head. "It feels like they're targeting us." The room fell silent for a moment. Everyone knew the cabin carried too many memories to lose. It was the place where birthdays had been celebrated, where laughter echoed late into the night, and where they had all come for comfort in difficult times. Peter spoke firmly. "We must stand together. Whatever this is, we will not let them take our home." Mark felt strength return to his heart hearing his father's words. Still, a small worry hid deep inside him. Something felt wrong. The following weeks brought more letters. Each one carried stronger words, more pressure, and bigger numbers. The HOA demanded fines that seemed unreal. Mark answered each with proof of his payments, but no reply ever admitted their mistake. One afternoon, he drove back to the lake cabin to check on it. As he stepped out of the car, he looked across the peaceful water. The sun painted golden lines across the lake. For a moment, he tried to forget the letters, the warnings, and the stress. But when he reached the cabin door, he found two more papers nailed there. One said final notice. The other said pending action. Mark stood still, holding the papers in his hands. The air felt heavy, and the birds in the trees seemed to quiet down. He whispered to himself, "This is our home. They can't just take it." Far behind him, the lake reflected the evening sky. It was calm, like it had always been, but in Mark's heart, a storm was beginning. Mark's mornings began to feel heavier as the letters from the HOA kept coming. Every time the mail arrived, Anna would glance nervously at the envelopes. She didn't need to open them anymore, she already knew the bold lettering on the outside, "Past due notice." One Sunday morning, Mark sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread in front of him. Bank statements, receipts, copies of checks, every piece of proof was there. Anna placed a cup of coffee beside him and touched his shoulder gently. "Are you sure they're even looking at what you sent?" she asked quietly. Mark sighed. "I don't think so. They keep repeating the same thing, like they're reading from a script. It's as if they want to ignore the truth." Anna bit her lip. What if they take it further? What if they try to? She stopped, unable to finish the thought. Mark reached for her hand. "I won't let that happen. This cabin is ours. They don't get to rewrite history." Later that week, Mark decided to go in person to the HOA office. He drove into the small town near the lake, where the office stood in a two-story brick building. The sign outside read Lakeview Community Association. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee. A receptionist looked up with a polite but distant smile. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Mark said, holding a folder. "I'm here about my cabin fees. I've received several notices saying I haven't paid, but I have records proving I have." She pointed to a chair. "Have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." After a long wait, a man in a neat suit came out. He introduced himself as Mr. Dalton, the HOA manager. His handshake was quick, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Mark explained everything, showing him the records. Dalton flipped through them quickly, then pushed them back across the table. "I understand your concern, Mr. Mark," he said in a practiced voice. "But our system shows unpaid fees. Until the balance is cleared, the penalties will remain." Mark leaned forward. "But these are my payments. You can see the dates, the amounts, the confirmation numbers." Dalton shrugged lightly. "If the system doesn't recognize them, then they don't count." Frustration burned in Mark's chest, but he kept his tone calm. "Are you saying my proof means nothing?" Dalton offered another empty smile. "You can always file a dispute. But until then, the account stands as past due." Mark left the office with his folder clutched tightly in his hand. Outside, the sky was overcast, and the lake in the distance looked dull under the clouds. For the first time, Mark felt a small spark of fear. That evening, he gathered the family again at his father's house. The table was crowded with papers as Mark laid out the latest notice. "This one says they may begin foreclosure proceedings if the balance isn't paid in 30 days, Mark explained, his voice low. Maria gasped softly. "Foreclosure? That's absurd. You've paid everything." David frowned, his hands folded tightly. "This is more than a mistake. It feels planned." Peter, their father, studied the papers in silence for a long time before speaking. "Sometimes people in power forget their duty and start serving themselves instead. We must watch carefully." Anna looked at him. "But what can we do? They don't listen." Peter placed a hand over hers. "The truth has a way of showing itself, even when hidden. Patience and persistence will bring it out." The words brought comfort, but Mark could see the worry in everyone's faces. The cabin wasn't just a building, it was their anchor, a part of their lives. To imagine it being taken felt like losing a piece of their hearts. In the following days, Mark received 2 more letters. One said he now owed extra fees for late payments. The other warned of final action if the balance was not resolved. Each letter felt heavier than the last. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Mark's daughter climbed onto his lap. "Dad," she whispered, "are we going to lose the cabin?" Mark hugged her tightly. "No, sweetheart. We're not going to lose it. That cabin is part of us. No one can take that away." But when she went to bed, Mark sat quietly, staring at the letters. Anna sat beside him, her eyes full of unspoken questions. Mark finally said, "They're not just mistaken. They're trying to push us out. And I don't know why." Anna's hand found his. "Then we'll find out. Together." Mark looked out the window, where the night sky was filled with stars. Somewhere beyond those stars, he believed, his grandfather was watching. He silently promised that he would not let their home disappear. The next day, as Mark drove past the lake on his way back from work, he slowed the car. The water sparkled in the sunlight, beautiful and calm. Yet something inside him tightened. He had a strange feeling, as if the peace of the lake was being threatened by something unseen. He whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." And in his heart, he knew the storm was drawing closer. The morning was bright and clear when Mark decided to take his family to the cabin again. He hoped a quiet weekend by the lake would give everyone peace. After weeks of letters and tension, they all needed a break. The children were excited, singing in the back seat as the car wound through tall pines. Anna leaned her head against the window, trying to relax. Even Mark felt his heart grow lighter as the familiar road curved toward the water. But when they reached the last bend, Mark pressed the brakes suddenly. His breath caught. The cabin, the place that had stood for generations, was gone. Instead of the wooden roof and stone chimney, there was only rubble. Splintered wood, broken glass, and dust covered the ground where their family home had stood for decades. Heavy machines were still parked nearby. A bulldozer sat silently, its blade streaked with dirt and wood. The children's voices stopped. "Dad, where's the cabin?" his son whispered. Mark stepped out of the car, his legs heavy as if they carried stones. Anna followed, her hands pressed against her mouth. The air smelled of fresh cut pine mixed with the bitter dust of destruction. He walked slowly toward the wreckage, each step echoing in his chest. Pieces of their life lay scattered: the old rocking chair broken in half, his mother's curtains torn and dirty in the dirt, photo frames cracked and empty. Anna's eyes filled with tears. They destroyed it? Mark clenched his fists, his heart pounding in disbelief. "Without warning, without even telling us." Just then, a man in a safety vest walked toward them, holding a clipboard. His tone was flat, almost careless. "This property was demolished under order of the HOA. Non-payment of fees." Mark stared at him, his voice shaking. "We paid. We always paid. This was our family's home. You had no right." The man shrugged. "I just follow orders. You'll have to talk to the HOA office." He turned away, leaving Mark standing in the ruins of his family's history. The children clung to Anna, frightened by the sight. She hugged them close, whispering soft words, though her own tears slipped down her cheeks. Mark bent down and picked up a broken photo frame. Inside was a picture of his grandfather, holding a fishing rod and smiling proudly in front of the very cabin now turned to dust. Mark's throat tightened as he brushed the dirt off the glass. "This was more than wood and stone," he whispered. "This was our life." That evening, the family gathered again at Peter's house. The mood was heavy, the air filled with grief. Peter sat silently, staring into the distance, his usually strong hands trembling slightly. They tore it down, Mark said, his voice low but firm. Without listening, without checking the truth. Maria covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. How could they? That cabin was part of us. David's eyes burned with anger, though he spoke calmly. This wasn't an accident. They wanted it gone. The room grew silent, only the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Finally, Peter spoke, his voice deep and steady. They think they ended something. But they don't know who they are dealing with. Mark looked at his father. There was a strength in his eyes that reminded him of the stories he had heard as a boy, stories of resilience, of standing tall in the face of injustice. The children sat quietly in the corner, holding each other's hands. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they could feel the pain around them. Anna placed her hand on Mark's shoulder. We can't let this break us. Mark nodded slowly. His heart was heavy, but he felt something stir inside him. A spark, small but steady. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the ruins of the cabin, the bulldozer parked like a silent monster beside it, the photo frame cracked in his hand. He thought about his grandfather's hard work, his parents' laughter, his children's joy by the lake. And he thought about the HOA letters, the false claims, the cold words of Mr. Dalton. Mark realized something important. The HOA had taken away the cabin, but they hadn't taken away the truth or his family's strength. He rose quietly, stepping out into the night air. The sky above was full of stars, clear and bright. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the cool wind wash over him. A voice inside whispered, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The next morning, he gathered the family again. His voice was calm but strong. They thought we would accept this. They thought we would walk away quietly. But we are not finished. We will not give up. Everyone listened closely. Maria nodded, David leaned forward, and Anna squeezed his hand. Even the children looked up with wide eyes, sensing something important. Peter spoke softly but firmly. They made a mistake. They touched what should never have been touched. Now we show them who we are. Mark took a deep breath. Then we begin. Step by step, we'll uncover the truth. And we will not stop until we have justice. The room filled with a quiet strength. The grief was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. Something new had entered: determination. For the first time since the demolition, Mark felt sure. The cabin was gone, but their fight had just begun. The days after the demolition were heavy with silence. At Peter's home, the family moved quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. It was as if the heart of their family had been ripped out, leaving only a hollow ache. Mark sat many nights at the dining table, the broken photo frame from the cabin beside him. He traced the crack in the glass with his finger, remembering his grandfather's proud smile. Anna often sat across from him, watching, her eyes filled with worry but also with faith. The children asked fewer questions now, sensing the weight in the air. They no longer begged to go to the cabin. Instead, they stayed close to their parents, listening silently whenever the adults spoke. One evening, the family gathered again in the living room. The air was thick with unspoken grief, but Mark finally broke the silence. They think it's over, he said softly, his eyes on the floor. They think they destroyed our spirit with the cabin. But they don't know us. David leaned forward, his jaw tight. What do you mean? Mark lifted his gaze. We have something they don't expect. Strength. Skills. Connections. We've been quiet all these years, living our lives. But now, maybe it's time we use what we know. Anna looked at him, uncertain. Mark, but Peter raised his hand, stopping her. His eyes met Mark's with a calm understanding. You're right, son. They don't know who we are. They don't know what kind of family they tried to push. Maria, who had been silent until now, spoke in a low voice. Maybe it's time we stop acting like this is only about money. It's not. It's about corruption. About people abusing power. David nodded. Exactly. And corruption doesn't hide well when the right people start looking. Anna looked around the room, her worry slowly shifting into realization. You mean, all of us? Together? Mark gave a small smile for the first time in weeks. Yes. Together. For years, their family had worked quietly in different corners of federal service. David in investigations, Maria in finance, Peter as a retired officer, and even Anna had knowledge from her past work in government records. They had never spoken much about it outside, because to them, family came first. The cabin had always been their escape from the weight of their jobs. But now, the place that gave them peace had been torn away. And the same skills they had kept separate suddenly seemed meant to come together. Peter's voice carried steady strength. We never boasted about our work because we didn't need to. But now, our silence ends. If they used lies to destroy our home, we will use truth to uncover their lies. A quiet determination settled over the room. The next day, Mark and David began reviewing every letter they had received from the HOA. Maria spread out her laptop and started searching for public records. Anna organized bank statements and old payment receipts, carefully placing them in folders. Even Peter sat with a notepad, writing down names, dates, and connections. It wasn't fast work, and it wasn't easy. But for the first time since the cabin fell, there was purpose in their hearts. At night, they shared stories while they worked. Maria remembered how their mother had loved to sit on the cabin porch, watching the sunset. David recalled fishing with Mark until late, laughing when they caught nothing. Anna smiled softly as she told the children about the small birthdays they had celebrated by the lake, with candles glowing against the dark water. These memories no longer brought only pain, they also brought fire. Fire to fight, fire to protect what mattered. One evening, after hours of digging through documents, Maria looked up from her laptop. Her voice was calm but serious. I found something strange. Payments from homeowners don't match the HOA's reported accounts. The numbers don't add up. David leaned closer. So, some money is missing. Yes, Maria replied. And it's not just small amounts. It looks like someone's been moving funds. Mark felt his heart race. That explains why they ignored our proof. If they admitted my payments, it would expose their false records. Peter's eyes sharpened. Then this isn't just about our cabin. They've been doing this to others too. Anna whispered, how many families have suffered without knowing the truth? The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence was not empty, it was powerful. They were no longer grieving. They were preparing. That night, as Mark stood outside under the stars, he felt a shift inside himself. The cabin was gone, but in its place, something stronger had risen. His family, united not only by love but by purpose. He whispered into the night air, you took our home. But you woke something you should have left sleeping. The wind moved gently through the trees, as if carrying his words across the lake. Inside, his family worked late into the night, their determination glowing brighter than any fire they had ever lit inside the cabin. The storm had begun, but this time, it was not against them, it was with them. The following week, the family's home turned into a quiet headquarters. Papers, laptops, and files covered the dining table where they once shared warm dinners. Instead of laughter, the air now carried the low hum of determination. Mark woke early every morning, not to go fishing or take a walk by the lake, but to study the HOA letters again. Each word, each date, each number was examined like a clue. Maria sat beside him with her laptop open, her fingers moving quickly over the keys. Her work in finance had given her an eye for numbers, and nothing unusual escaped her. "There," she whispered one morning, pointing to her screen. "This payment should have been marked received, but instead, it's listed as pending. And it's not just you, Mark. I checked 2 other homeowners whose information I found online. Same thing." Mark leaned closer. "So they're collecting the money, but their records show it's missing." Maria nodded. "Exactly. Which means someone inside the HOA is moving the payments elsewhere." Anna, who had been sorting receipts into folders, looked up. "That's why they ignored your proof. If they admitted your payment, their false records would collapse." David, who had spent years in investigations, listened carefully. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "This is a pattern of fraud. They're not just after our cabin. They're stealing from the whole community." Peter, sitting quietly with his notepad, tapped the table with his pen. "The question is, who's behind it?" The room grew silent. Everyone knew the name that would come up. "Dalton," Mark said finally. "The HOA manager. He's the one who looked at my records and dismissed them without care." David nodded. "He's definitely involved. But I doubt he's working alone. People like him always have a circle." The family decided to move carefully. They didn't want the HOA to know they were digging. Instead of bold accusations, they would gather truth quietly, step by step. That evening, David drove out to the neighborhood near the lake. He spoke with a few homeowners casually, asking about their experiences. Many of them looked nervous, lowering their voices when speaking. One elderly man whispered, "I kept getting notices saying I didn't pay. But I had. I was scared they'd take my house, so I paid twice. I didn't know what else to do." Another woman admitted, "I thought it was my mistake. I didn't want trouble, so I just sent the money again." David listened carefully, thanking them for their time. He didn't reveal much about himself, only promised, "Things will not stay this way forever." Back at home, he shared what he learned. "They've been doing this for a long time. People are too afraid to fight. They think it's easier to pay twice than to stand up." Mark's heart ached hearing this. It wasn't just about his family anymore, it was about all the families who had been quietly suffering, too afraid to question authority. Maria continued digging through financial records late into the night. She discovered something that made her pause. "I think I found where the money is going. Look, there are transfers to a private account under a company name. But the company doesn't exist in any official record." Peter leaned forward. "A shell company," he said firmly. "They created it to hide the stolen payments." Mark rubbed his forehead. "So they demolished our cabin not because we didn't pay, but because we refused to let their lie go unnoticed." Anna whispered, "They thought breaking us would silence us." But instead of silence, the family felt stronger. The next day, Mark sat with his children at the breakfast table. He didn't want them to feel left out, even if they didn't fully understand. "Why are you all working so much?" his son asked, frowning. Mark smiled softly. "Because sometimes, when people do wrong, you have to stand up. Not just for yourself, but for others, too." His daughter tilted her head. "Like superheroes?" Mark chuckled. "Not exactly. But in a way, yes. Ordinary people can fight for what's right. That's what makes them strong." The children nodded, a spark of pride in their eyes. That evening, the family gathered again. Maria spread the evidence across the table. "We now have enough to show that the HOA board is hiding money, creating false debt, and using threats to push families out." David added, "And if they're connected to land developers, it could mean they demolished the cabin to clear space for something bigger, maybe new property deals." Mark felt his chest tighten, but not with fear, with determination. "Then we take this higher. Step by step. We'll collect everything, then bring it where it cannot be ignored. Peter placed his hand flat on the table, steady and strong. Remember, truth is patient. It waits for the right time to come out. And when it does, it shines brighter than lies ever can. The family nodded in agreement. That night, as the house grew quiet, Mark walked outside again. The air was cool, and the stars glittered above. He thought of the cabin's ruins by the lake, the broken wood, the crushed memories. But instead of sadness, he felt a new fire. His family was no longer broken. They were united, stronger than before, and ready to uncover every hidden truth. He whispered to himself, "You thought you buried us in dust. But you only planted a seed. Now, we rise." And deep inside, he knew the battle had only just begun. The air inside Peter's home was different now. It no longer carried only grief but also a quiet strength. The family had gathered more than enough proof to show the HOA's corruption. Still, they knew they had to move carefully. Mark sat at the table, flipping through the files Maria had prepared. Bank transfers, missing payments, fake company names, it was all there, laid out in black and white. David leaned back in his chair. "If we take this straight to court, they'll try to bury us in delay after delay. We need a stronger path." Maria nodded. "Agreed. We need to place this where they can't twist it. Somewhere the truth will shine without them being able to hide." Peter looked at them with steady eyes. "Then we take it to higher authorities. People who don't answer to the HOA." Mark thought about Dalton, the HOA manager, with his cold smile and careless words. For weeks, Dalton had spoken with the confidence of someone untouchable. But Mark knew that confidence would soon crack. The family divided their work. Maria prepared a full report of the financial fraud. David arranged quiet meetings with contacts in law enforcement. Anna organized every payment record into clear folders, easy to follow. Even Peter helped by writing statements and timelines from memory. Each night, they worked late. And slowly, they began to feel the weight shift. For weeks, the HOA had pressed them down with lies and threats. Now, it was the truth pressing back. One afternoon, David returned from the town with news. "I spoke to a few more homeowners," he said. "They're scared, but they're ready to speak if someone protects them. They've been carrying the same pain we did." Anna's eyes softened. "So we're not alone." "No," David said firmly. "We're not." A few days later, word began to spread quietly around the community. People whispered about missing payments, about being charged twice, about strange letters just like Mark's. At first, it was only murmurs. But soon, those murmurs became voices. And those voices reached the HOA board. Dalton sat in his office one morning, flipping through reports, when his assistant rushed in. "Sir, people are talking. Some families are asking for audits. They're saying the fees don't match their payments." Dalton's face tightened. "Ignore it. Tell them it's a system error. Always the system." But inside, a flicker of worry moved through him. Back at Peter's house, Maria smiled as she read the latest responses from homeowners. "They're no longer afraid," she said. "The moment one person spoke up, others followed. The wall of silence is breaking." Mark listened quietly, his heart heavy with both hope and caution. "That's good. But we must protect them. If the HOA feels cornered, they may try something desperate." That evening, the family sent their full report to federal authorities through the right channels. They knew it would take time, but they also knew it could not be ignored. The following week, investigators began quietly visiting the town. At first, the HOA board members acted calm, greeting them with smiles and polished answers. But as the questions grew sharper, the cracks began to show. Where did these payments go? Why are homeowners listed as unpaid when bank records show otherwise? Who owns this shell company receiving transfers? Dalton tried to keep his composure, but each question felt heavier than the last. News of the investigation spread quickly among the neighbors. Families who once kept their heads down now stood taller, realizing they had not been alone in their struggles. Some even came to Mark privately, thanking him and his family for speaking up. One elderly woman held Mark's hand tightly. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "I thought I was losing my mind. But you showed me I wasn't." Mark's eyes softened. "No one deserves to feel alone in the truth," he said gently. Meanwhile, Dalton grew restless. He sat at his desk late at night, flipping through papers, trying to find a way out. His once steady hands now shook as he signed documents. The board members who once laughed and joked in meetings now argued in hushed voices. Fear was creeping into their walls. Back at Peter's home, the family gathered again. The children listened quietly from the couch as the adults spoke. David leaned forward. "It's happening. The truth is spreading faster than they can control it." Maria nodded. "The investigators are following the money trail. It won't be long before it all comes out." Anna added softly, "The neighbors believe again. They've found courage." Mark sat back, letting out a slow breath. For the first time since the cabin had been torn down, he felt a spark of peace. Not complete, but enough to remind him that the fight had meaning. Peter looked around at his family. His voice was calm, almost proud. "Do you see? This is what happens when you stand together. Lies fall apart when faced with truth. It may take time, but it always happens." The room fell quiet. Outside the window, the night sky stretched wide, stars glimmering over the town that had once seemed silent. Mark thought of the cabin, the porch, the dock, the smell of pine. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he could almost hear the sound of laughter echoing against the lake again. Then he opened them, his voice steady. "This isn't over yet. But their fear tells us one thing: we're winning." And in that moment, everyone in the room felt it. The cabin may have been gone, but the family had built something stronger in its place: hope, courage, and truth. The morning sun broke over the town, casting soft light across quiet streets. For months, the neighborhood had been filled with whispers and tension, but now a new air carried through, an air of change. Mark walked down the small road with his father, Peter, beside him. The two men did not speak much. They didn't need to. They could feel it: the storm that had shaken their lives was finally clearing. The investigation into the HOA had grown larger than anyone expected. What began as a single complaint about unpaid fees had unfolded into a wide net of fraud. The board members, once proud and untouchable, now sat behind locked doors, their voices hushed, their power slipping away with every passing day. Dalton, the man who had led the destruction of Mark's cabin, had been forced to face questioning after questioning. Each time, the answers he tried to twist only trapped him deeper in the truth. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted one another openly. Families who had suffered in silence stepped forward, sharing their stories. Together, they stood taller, no longer bound by fear. At Peter's home, the family gathered once again. The children played in the yard, laughter ringing in the air like a promise of brighter days. Inside, the adults sat around the wooden table, where so many late-night talks had been held. David entered the room with a quiet smile. "It's done," he said. "The board has been removed. Authorities are pressing charges. Their control is finished." Maria let out a breath she had been holding for weeks. "So it's really over," she whispered. Peter's hands, weathered with years, rested on the table. His eyes shone with something deep, both relief and pride. "Truth always wins," he said softly. "It may take time, but it never fails." Mark sat quietly for a long moment, listening to the sound of his children outside. He thought of the cabin, the one place where his family's memories had grown, where laughter and stories had lived. It was gone, but the spirit of it was not. Anna touched his arm gently. "We can rebuild," she said. "Not just the cabin, but everything it stood for." Mark turned to her, his heart heavy yet light at the same time. "Yes," he said. "We will rebuild." The family began to plan. Neighbors offered to help, some with materials, others with time and hands. What had once been a private fight was now a shared mission. Everyone understood that the cabin by the lake had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of standing strong, of choosing truth over silence. Weeks later, Mark and his family stood at the edge of the lake once more. The sun dipped low across the water, painting the surface gold. The land where the cabin had stood was bare, but it was not empty. Mark placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "This is where we begin again," he said. Together, they worked. Boards were raised, nails hammered, laughter echoing with every step. Neighbors joined in, carrying planks, holding ladders, sharing meals. The sound of building filled the air, mixing with birdsong and the soft ripple of the lake. And slowly, day by day, a new cabin rose. It was not the same as the one before. It was brighter, stronger, built with more hands, more hearts. Each wall carried not just wood and nails but stories of courage and unity. One evening, when the cabin was almost finished, the family gathered on the new porch. The lake stretched before them, calm and wide, reflecting the stars above. Peter sat in his chair, a quiet smile on his face. "This," he said softly, "is what they could never take away. They could tear down wood and stone, but not this. Not family. Not hope." Mark looked at him, then at Anna, Maria, David, and the children. His heart felt full in a way he had almost forgotten. "They thought they broke us," he said. "But all they did was bring us closer." The children leaned against the railing, pointing at the fireflies dancing over the water. Their laughter filled the night, pure and unshaken. The family sat together, no words needed for a while. The cabin stood strong behind them, the lake wide before them, and the stars endless above them. In that moment, Mark understood something deeply. Home was not just a place. It was people. It was truth. It was love that refused to fall, no matter the storm. The HOA was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was a family stronger than ever, a community healed, and a cabin by the lake that would forever stand as a reminder: no lie, no greed, no cruelty could ever defeat the bond of those who chose to stand together. And so, with the night wrapped around them and the water shining in peace, their story did not end. It simply began again, bright, strong, and unbroken.